The moon hung like a silent sentinel in the midnight sky, casting its cool light on the streets below. It was a night that seemed to stretch on forever, filled with a sense of anticipation. And in the quiet corners of a bustling city, one man's life was about to change forever. James had always been a man of routine, a steady job in the finance world, a comfortable home with a beautiful wife, Sarah, whom he adored, and an unspoken trust that made him believe their marriage was unshakable. They had been together for nearly a decade, and despite the pressures of life, their bond had remained steadfast. Or so he thought. But there had been something subtle, that had gnawed at the edges of his mind in recent months. A slight shift in Sarah's behavior, a late-night work call that seemed to run longer than usual, her sudden frequent trips out of town for business meetings that never quite seemed to add up. At first, James dismissed these doubts. After all, what could possibly break the sanctity of their relationship? He trusted her, as any devoted husband would. Then, on a cold Tuesday evening, the truth revealed itself in a way that he could never have anticipated. It began innocently enough. James had stayed late at the office, drowning in spreadsheets and numbers. As he walked back to his car, his phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "I'll be late tonight. Don't wait up for me. Love you." His heart swelled with that familiar sense of comfort, but an odd feeling tugged at him. Perhaps it was the hour or the way the text was worded. It seemed a little too detached for his liking. He shrugged it off and drove home. But as he neared their house, something caught his eye. An unfamiliar car parked down the street, its headlights dimly glowing in the distance. He felt a shift in the air, a strange unease curling in his stomach. The car was new to him, and, though he knew it was a stretch, his instincts told him to take a closer look. In the shadows of the trees, the car's owner was nowhere to be seen, yet someone, was watching from behind a window in the house. The curtains shifted, and through the small crack, James could make out a silhouette. His breath caught. What was going on? His pulse quickened. He couldn't shake the thought that something wasn't right, that the layers of their life had begun to unravel, just beyond his reach. But was it possible? Was Sarah keeping a secret from him? Fueled by a cocktail of doubt and determination, he made a decision. He had to follow the thread of suspicion and see where it led. Later that night, with his mind racing, James pulled into the parking lot of a luxury hotel on the edge of the city, one Sarah had mentioned only once, in passing, during a casual conversation months ago. It wasn't a place he'd ever expect to see her, not in the world they'd built together. The lights in the lobby gleamed softly through the glass doors, casting long shadows on the sleek marble floors. He parked a few blocks away, the cool night air biting at his skin as he walked to the entrance. The lobby was quiet, almost eerily, so with only a few guests milling about. A concierge stood at the desk, politely nodding as James approached. "Good evening, sir. How may I help you?" James cleared his throat, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm looking for someone. My wife. Sarah, she's staying here tonight." The concierge's face was a picture of practiced politeness, but there was something unreadable in his gaze. "I'm afraid I can't share guest information, sir." James nodded, already knowing the answer. It was a dead end for now, but that wouldn't stop him. He wandered through the halls, the soft carpet muffling his footsteps as his heart pounded in his chest. The elevator doors opened before him, and without a moment's hesitation, he stepped inside. The numbers above flickered as the elevator ascended, bringing him closer to the floor he had to find. And then when it opened, there it was, her room. He didn't know how he knew, but the instincts that had guided him so far weren't wrong. Room 302. His heart raced as he crept toward the door. For a moment, the world seemed to fall away, the weight of betrayal heavy in the air. What would he find behind that door? Could he really face the truth if it was staring back at him? With a trembling hand, he knocked. And then, the door creaked open. There she stood. Sarah. But she wasn't. Alone. James's eyes locked onto the figure beside her. The man was tall, with dark hair and a chiseled jawline. Someone James didn't recognize. A sudden rush of heat flooded his body, and a terrible, familiar ache twisted in his chest. The truth was undeniable. Sarah's eyes widened in shock. For a brief moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, with the force of 100 emotions, everything broke open. The apology, the lies, the whispered explanations. But they were just words now. Empty sounds, barely a whisper in the storm. Of betrayal. The days that followed felt like a strange kind of purgatory. James hadn't expected the raw ache of betrayal to hit so hard, nor had he imagined the sense of numbness that accompanied it. The life he'd once known, one of certainty, of routine, seemed like a dream slipping through his fingers, the reality now sharp and brutal. After that night, Sarah had tried to reach out to him. Phone calls, text messages, and even emails flooded his inbox. Each word she sent felt like an attempt to patch a gaping wound. She was sorry, she said. She had been confused, caught up in something that spiraled out of control. But her words were just that. Words. And James found it harder and harder to believe anything she said. He didn't want to respond. He didn't want to hear her explanations, to dive into the tangled mess of what-ifs and maybes. There was nothing left to salvage in the past. No reason to pretend as though things could go back to how they were. Every apology she sent, every tear she shed, only reminded him of the man who had stood beside her in that hotel room. Yet, despite the rage that swirled in his chest, there was another part of him that mourned, not just for the betrayal, but for the loss of the woman he had once known so deeply. The woman who had shared his dreams, his laughter, his quiet moments. Where had she gone? Who was this person standing before him, claiming remorse, but offering only a fractured version of herself? As the weeks wore on, James wrestled with the notion of closure. What did closure even mean now? How could he simply walk away from the life they'd built? And yet, staying felt like a prison, a place where the wounds could never heal. One evening, after days of silent reflection, he agreed to meet Sarah. Not in their home, not in the comfort of their shared space, but in a small cafe on the outskirts of the city, a neutral ground where neither of them could hide behind the walls they had once so carefully built. Sarah arrived first, her face pale, her eyes swollen from too many nights spent crying. When she saw him, there was a flicker of hope, of desperation. But it was quickly replaced by a look of uncertainty, as though she too was unsure of what this meeting was meant to achieve. James took a seat across from her, his hands clasped tightly together, his gaze never wavering from hers. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Finally, Sarah broke it. Her voice was barely a whisper. "James, I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe me." "I don't know if I can," he replied, the words sharp, cutting through the air. "I don't know who you are anymore." She flinched as if the words had struck her deep, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned forward, her hands trembling as they rested on the table. "I've been seeing him for months," she confessed, her voice cracking. "At first, it was just someone to talk to, someone who made me feel heard. But it got complicated. It got out of hand. I never meant for things to go this far, but they did." James's heart clenched, but he forced himself to listen. He had to, for his own sake. "I'm sorry," Sarah continued. "I was so lost in myself, in everything I thought I was missing, that I didn't see what was slipping through my fingers. I didn't see you, James. I didn't see us. And now it's too late. I know it is." There was a vulnerability in her eyes, one that James couldn't ignore no matter how much he wanted to. She was broken, but so was he. And in that shared moment of pain, he understood that they were both trapped in the same storm, only on opposite sides. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again," James said, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. "And I don't know if I want to try." He could feel the weight of those words settle between them, a finality that hung in the air. But the truth was, he wasn't sure what he wanted. He didn't know if he was ready to walk away completely, to shut the door on everything they had built, or if he still believed that somewhere, beneath the rubble of their relationship, there was a flicker of the woman he had loved, the woman who had once been his partner, his confidant. But in that moment, as Sarah looked at him with those tear-filled eyes, he realized something. Closure wasn't something that could be handed to him, not from her, not from anyone. It had to come from within. It had to be something he chose for himself, something he could let go of piece by piece, no matter how much it hurt. Standing up from the table, James gave her one last look. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Sarah. But I can't be part of this anymore." He walked away, each step feeling like the beginning of something new, something unknown, something that might bring him peace, something that might finally heal the cracks in his heart. But the path to healing, he knew, wouldn't be easy. As time wore on, James found himself in a strange place. The immediate pain of the betrayal had faded, but it left a mark, an indelible scar that would never fully heal. Still, he could feel the weight of the past beginning to lift, inch by inch, as he took tentative steps into a future that was no longer tethered to Sarah or their former life. He focused on work, diving into projects he had put on the back burner during his marriage, rediscovering old hobbies he had abandoned long ago. The quiet moments, the ones that once felt empty without her presence beside him, slowly began to fill with a sense of peace, a peace that had eluded him for so long. But even as he moved forward, the questions lingered, the ones that haunted him in the stillness of the night. Why? How did it happen? What was I missing? The answers, if they existed, seemed too elusive. He wasn't sure he wanted them anymore. Perhaps some questions were better left unanswered. One evening, as he was leaving the office, he spotted a familiar face across the street, a fleeting glimpse that caused his heart to skip a beat. It was Sarah, standing by the curb, dressed in a coat that looked like it belonged to someone else. She was talking to a man, a new man, someone he didn't recognize. And though he tried not to, he couldn't help but notice the way her eyes softened when she looked at him. For a moment, time seemed to freeze, the world around him blurring into the background as he watched them. But then, just as quickly, the moment passed. Sarah turned away, and the man said something that made her laugh, a sound that had once been a part of his world, a sound that now felt so foreign, so distant. James didn't stay to watch. He turned away, the weight of the past settling on his shoulders once more. He could feel the sting, but it was different now. There was no bitterness, no anger, just an undeniable truth. They had both moved on. The world had a way of shifting underfoot, of carrying people in unexpected directions. Sarah had found a new chapter in her life, and though he wished her well, James knew that chapter wasn't his to be part of anymore. He had his own story to write now, a story that could no longer include her. And so, as the weeks turned into months, and the months into years, James continued on his journey. He explored the depths of his own soul, rediscovering parts of himself that had long been buried under the weight of the past. He found new relationships, forged new friendships, and began to trust again, slowly, cautiously, but with the hope that love, in whatever form it might take, was still possible. But he also learned that love wasn't just something you gave to another person. It was something you gave to yourself. It was in the quiet moments of reflection, in the decision to move forward, to grow, and to heal. It was in the realization that, even after the greatest of betrayals, the heart has an incredible capacity for resilience. And so, in the end, it wasn't about Sarah. It wasn't about the hotel or the lies or the secrets. It was about James and the strength he found within himself to rise from the ashes, to rebuild, and to find his own path to peace. For in the silence of his heart, he had come to understand one simple truth: life would continue, and the future, no matter how uncertain, held infinite possibilities. As James continued down his path of rebuilding, he came to realize something profound. The journey of self-healing was not linear. There were moments when the weight of the past would unexpectedly resurface, like a shadow crossing over a bright, sunlit day. But those moments grew shorter, less consuming, until one day he noticed that the weight of the memories had softened, no longer a burden, but a part of who he had become. A year after his encounter with Sarah at the cafe, James decided it was time to leave the city. The streets, the places, the faces, it all reminded him of a past that, while shaping him, no longer served him. He needed to escape the ghosts of his old life, to find a fresh space where he could forge new memories, a place where he could become the man he was destined to be, free of the shadows that clung to his history. He packed his things in the dead. Of night, his only company the hum of the moving truck and the sound of his own thoughts. His new home would be a small cottage tucked away in the woods, far from the hustle and bustle of the city, a sanctuary surrounded by towering trees and the quiet whispers of nature. It was a place where he could breathe again, a place that invited introspection, peace, and the chance to start anew. The first few months were challenging. The quiet was both a balm and a test. The isolation that had once seemed soothing sometimes felt suffocating. But in the solitude, James discovered something he hadn't anticipated, an even deeper connection with himself. In the mornings, he would take long walks through the forest, the cool air filling his lungs as he left behind the weight of the past with every step. He picked up old hobbies, like painting and writing, things he had abandoned in the rush of life's demands. And at night, when the sky stretched out in a blanket of stars, he found comfort in the stillness, knowing that he was no longer running from anything. It was during one of those quiet evenings, while sitting on his porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, that he received an unexpected message. It was from Sarah. His heart skipped a beat when he saw her name appear on his screen. He hadn't heard from her in months, and truthfully, he had never expected to. The last time their paths had crossed felt like the final chapter of a book, one that he had closed firmly, unwilling to revisit the past. But curiosity, that old, persistent friend, pushed him to open the message. "James, I don't know where to begin." The message read, "I've tried reaching out, but I know I have no right to ask for anything from you. You've probably forgotten all about me, and maybe that's for the best. But I want to tell you something I should have said a long time ago." He exhaled slowly, feeling a mixture of emotions welling up inside him. He didn't know what to expect from this message, but he couldn't deny the swirl of memories it brought to the surface. Was this just another plea for forgiveness? Or was it something else? He continued reading. "I've made mistakes, James, and I know I hurt you in ways that can never be undone. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, but I am asking for your understanding. I wanted to tell you that I've changed, that I've learned so much about myself. I've been seeing a therapist, working on the things that led me down that path. I've realized that the love I thought I was seeking outside of us was really a reflection of what I was missing inside." James's fingers hovered over the screen. His mind whirled with thoughts. Was this an attempt at reconciliation? A way to ease her own guilt? Or was it genuine? A sign that she too had moved forward, had become something more, something different than the woman who had broken his heart. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he sat with the message, letting the words sink in as the sky outside slowly darkened. For so long, he had believed that closing that door meant leaving everything behind, leaving her behind. But maybe, just maybe, this was the kind of closure he had been waiting for all along. As the days passed, James found himself contemplating the message, not with anger or resentment, but with a sense of peace. He had moved on, yes, but it didn't mean that the story of their relationship was something to be discarded entirely. It had been a part of his life, a part of who he had become. And so, he decided to reply, not to reopen old wounds, but to acknowledge the growth they had both experienced. "I'm glad you found the help you needed, Sarah," he wrote. "I'm not angry anymore. I don't know if I can ever fully understand what happened, but I do know this. We both learned, we both changed, and maybe that's enough. I wish you well, wherever life takes you." He pressed send, and then set his phone aside, a quiet sense of finality settling over him. There was no anger, no lingering ache. As the seasons shifted, so too did James. The solitude of his cottage in the woods had become a sanctuary, and in the quiet spaces between his thoughts, he had come to appreciate the beauty of growth, the way it often came not in grand gestures, but in small, unnoticeable shifts that slowly transformed the landscape of one's heart and mind. The years following that message from Sarah were filled with a steady rhythm of life. He spent time hiking the nearby trails, writing in the mornings, and volunteering at a local animal shelter. He had discovered a love for helping others, for seeing the way small acts of kindness could ripple through a community and create something far greater than the sum of its parts. Through this, James found that his capacity for love had not diminished. It had, in fact, deepened. He had learned that love was not always about possession, not about ownership, but about the ability to support, to understand, and to respect another person's journey as they walked alongside your own. His past with Sarah had taught him this, though it had taken heartbreak to reach the revelation. He also began to open himself up to new relationships, but this time with more wisdom, more clarity. He was no longer seeking the kind of love he had once had, consuming, possessive, and exclusive. Instead, he sought companionship in its truest form, a bond built on mutual respect, shared values, and the understanding that each person had their own path, their own journey to walk. It was during a late autumn evening that he met Lucy. She wasn't looking for anything, and neither was he. They met at a community fundraiser, both there as volunteers, and their conversation began simply enough. At first, it was small talk about the event, the weather, the work they were both involved in, but somewhere along the way, the connection deepened. There was an ease to their conversation, a sense of familiarity that neither of them could explain. They spoke for hours, wandering through the crowd, sharing stories of their past, their hopes for the future. Lucy was different. She was gentle and thoughtful, with a quiet strength that drew James in. There was no rush, no urgency to their connection, but something unspoken seemed to stir between them. She listened to him with a kind of attentiveness he hadn't experienced in years, as if every word he spoke mattered. As the months passed, their relationship grew slowly, and James found himself more and more captivated by her. It wasn't that she was a replacement for Sarah, because he had long since let go of the notion that anyone could ever fill that space. Rather, it was the realization that Lucy had her own place in his heart, one that was built from a foundation of mutual respect and admiration, without the weight of past hurts or unresolved baggage. With Lucy, he could be himself, unburdened by the ghosts of yesterday. They laughed together, they dreamed together, and in her company, James felt the most alive he had in years. The past no longer loomed as a shadow over their relationship, because they had built something entirely new, free from the constraints of what had come before. One evening, after several months of dating, James found himself standing on the edge of a cliff, looking out at the sweeping view of the valley below. Lucy stood beside him, her hand tucked into his, her warmth a quiet comfort as the sun set. Behind the mountains, painting the sky in hues of red and gold. They hadn't spoken much since they'd arrived. There was something sacred in the silence, something peaceful in the way they simply existed together, without needing to fill the space with words. Finally, Lucy broke the silence, her voice soft. "James, do you ever think about the past?" He turned his head to look at her, surprised by the question but not caught off guard. He had thought about the past, of course. Who hadn't? But now, standing there with her, looking out at the world they had yet to explore, the past felt like just that. A place he had come from, but not somewhere he was going. "Sometimes," he said, "but it doesn't define me anymore. It's part of my story, but it's not the whole story." Lucy smiled, her eyes filled with understanding. "I think that's what makes you strong, James. You've learned that." "I've had to," he replied. "The past can weigh you down if you let it. But it's not about forgetting it. It's about understanding it, learning from it, and then moving forward." She squeezed his hand, her gaze softening. "And you've done that. I admire that." James didn't have the words to respond. Immediately, he had come to understand that some things, some feelings, couldn't be put into words. They had to be lived, experienced, and felt in the heart. As they stood there, watching the last rays of the sun dip below the horizon, James felt a sense of quiet fulfillment settle over him. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in years, as the months turned into years, James found himself settling into a rhythm he had never imagined before. His life, once marred by the jagged edges of betrayal, was now carved into something smoother, something whole. He and Lucy, though their journey together had only just begun, felt like two pieces of a puzzle that fit perfectly, despite the scars they both carried from past lives. They built a life that was simple, yet rich in meaning, a life filled with shared adventures, quiet moments, and unspoken understandings. Weekends were spent exploring new hiking trails, enjoying coffee on the porch in the early morning light, or working side by side on small projects around the house. It was an easy love, a love that felt right, and yet it wasn't without its challenges. Lucy, too, had her past, her own stories of loss, heartache, and growth. But what made their relationship different was the openness between them, the willingness to face the past without letting it define their present. They didn't seek to erase their histories, but rather to weave them into the fabric of who they were together. James had learned something vital from his experience with Sarah. Love wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about never having doubts, never facing struggles. It was about resilience, about the quiet strength to hold on to each other through both the light and dark moments. It was about choosing each other every day, even when things weren't easy. One evening, as they sat together by the fireplace, Lucy turned to him with a thoughtful look in her eyes. The crackling fire illuminated her face, and James could see the depth of the question forming in her gaze. "James," she began slowly, her voice gentle but filled with the weight of the moment. "Do you ever wonder if we're meant to find each other in this life, or if we just stumble across each other by chance?" James considered her question for a long moment, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows around them. It was a question that touched a part of him he hadn't thought about in a while. In all the years of his healing, he had never stopped to think about fate, whether he had been destined to find Lucy, or whether it had simply been the right series of coincidences that brought them together. "I think," he said carefully, "that we make our own meaning in this life. Sometimes the people we meet, the paths we cross, they seem to happen by chance, but in a way they feel like they were always meant to happen, like we were always moving toward each other, even if we didn't know it." Lucy smiled, her eyes softening as she leaned against him. "I like that idea, that the universe doesn't just hand us what we want, but it brings us what we need, what we're ready for." "Exactly," James agreed. "And I think we're ready for each other. We're ready for the life we've started to build, for the challenges and the joy that will come. We've both walked through fire, but we're not defined by what's happened. We're defined by what we choose to do next." The quiet that followed was comforting, not heavy, but full of unspoken understanding. They didn't need to say more. They both knew that this was the foundation they had built, a love rooted in mutual respect, patience, and the understanding that life, no matter how uncertain, would always continue to unfold before them. In the years that followed, James and Lucy traveled, creating memories in distant cities and remote mountains, finding moments of peace in unexpected places. They learned, grew, and supported each other through everything that life presented to them. They were partners, but more importantly, they were friends. And though James had never fully understood the path his life would take, had never anticipated the deep love he would one day find again, he had come to realize that this was his journey, a journey not defined by a single event, a betrayal, or even a person. It was his to walk, and walk it he did, with his heart open, his mind clear, and a future ahead that was filled with promise. One evening, after a quiet dinner together, Lucy looked at him with the same warmth in her eyes that had first drawn him to her. "James," she said, her voice soft and loving, "do you think we'll always be this at peace?" He smiled, his heart full. "I hope so. I think peace is something we have to create, together, every day." She nodded, her fingers tracing the back of his hand. "Then let's keep creating it together." As they sat there in the soft glow of the evening light, James realized that the greatest love story wasn't one of grand gestures or fateful moments. It was one of ordinary days, of small, quiet decisions to choose each other, to face the future together, and to love without reservation. For the first time in years, James understood the true meaning of peace. It wasn't the absence of struggle or heartache. It was the unwavering commitment to move forward, together, with love as the guiding force. As the years continued to pass, James and Lucy's love deepened in ways that neither could have predicted. The foundation they had built, strong, patient, and rooted in mutual respect, had proven to be unshakable. Life was not without its challenges. There were always hurdles to navigate, difficult conversations to have, and moments where doubt threatened to creep in. But what they had together was a shared commitment to face those moments with openness and grace, without letting them define the entirety of their relationship. They had become a team in the truest sense of the word. Whether it was planning for the future, facing unexpected setbacks, or simply navigating the day-to-day rhythm of their lives, they did it together. Their house, once a quiet cottage in the woods, had become a home, filled with laughter, memories, and the warmth of a life well lived. One particularly cold winter evening, as snow gently fell outside, James found himself sitting by the fire, a book in hand, but his thoughts drifting. Lucy had gone to bed early, tired from a long day of work, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to fully reflect on everything that had led him to this moment. He thought about his life before Lucy, the loneliness, the heartbreak, the mistakes he had made, and how, despite all of it, he had managed to find a path forward. He had learned that life wasn't about avoiding pain or hardship. It was about learning how to rise from it, how to understand and transform those difficult moments into something meaningful. He had found a way to do that, not just for himself, but for the people he loved. He set the book aside and leaned back in his chair, staring into the flames. It was in moments like this, when everything was quiet and still, that he truly felt the depth of gratitude he had for Lucy and for the life they shared. He realized, too, that he wasn't just grateful for what he had now, but for what it had taken to get here. The pain, the loss, the struggles, they hadn't been in vain. They had shaped him, made him stronger, and had ultimately guided him toward this moment of peace. The door to the living room creaked open, and Lucy stepped in, still in her pajamas, her hair tousled from sleep. She looked at him with a soft smile, her eyes twinkling with a warmth that had never waned. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, stepping closer. James shook his head. "Just thinking." She sat down beside him, curling her legs under her as she settled into the couch. "About what?" He looked at her, his heart swelling with affection. "About how lucky I am. About how far we've come, and how much we've built together." Lucy smiled, her hand reaching out to gently touch his. "We've built a lot, and we're still building." James nodded, his gaze turning to the window where the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world outside in quiet whiteness. "Yeah. And I think that's the best part. We're not done yet." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the crackling fire, watching the snowflakes drift lazily to the ground. There was something sacred about these moments, James thought. The ordinary ones, the ones that seemed so small but were, in truth, the ones that mattered most. It was in the quiet companionship, the simple joys, that the real richness of life lay. "You know," Lucy said softly after a while, breaking the silence, "I've been thinking too." James turned his head to look at her, intrigued. "I was thinking about our future," she continued. "About how much we've already shared and how much more there is to experience together." James felt a flicker of curiosity. "What are you thinking?" Lucy smiled, a playful glint in her eye. "I was wondering if we could make some new plans. You know, something that will push us both out of our comfort zones." James raised an eyebrow, a grin tugging at his lips. "Like what?" Lucy leaned in slightly, her voice lowering. "What if we took a year off, traveled, explored, and really lived outside the confines of everything we know?" James blinked, caught off guard by the suggestion. It was the last thing he had expected, but as he let the idea sink in, something inside him stirred. Excitement, adventure, the kind of possibility that had always felt just out of reach. "A year off?" he repeated, his voice filled with wonder. "You mean just go?" "Why not?" Lucy said, her eyes filled with excitement. "We've both spent so much of our lives focused on what's next, on responsibilities, on building the perfect life. But what if we spent a year just living? No plans, no agendas, just us and the world to explore." James let out a breath, a smile breaking across his face. "I love the idea, but where would we even start?" Lucy's grin widened. "We'll figure it out together. That's what we do." In that moment, James felt a rush of something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of exhilaration, of freedom. The decision to take a year off, to step away from the familiar rhythms of their daily lives, was one that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. But in the weeks that followed, as they began to make plans, researching countries, destinations, and experiences, the initial uncertainty gave way to a quiet, anticipatory excitement. The world, vast and full of possibility, seemed to beckon them, inviting them to explore its corners, to savor the unexpected moments of joy and awe that came with each new experience. They sold the house, packed away their belongings, and made preparations to travel lightly, knowing that the memories they would make would be far more precious than the possessions they left behind. The day they left was filled with a bittersweet feeling. There was a sense of sadness in parting with the place that had been their home, the house that had witnessed their laughter, their growth, their struggles, and their triumphs. But there was also a sense of liberation, a thrilling freedom that came with knowing they had chosen to embrace a life without boundaries, at least for now. They started in Europe, landing in Paris, the city of lights, with a vague idea of where they might go next, but no concrete plans beyond that. The world felt like a blank canvas, and James could feel the weight of expectation lifting from his shoulders. No deadlines, no schedules, no pressures to conform. Just the pure joy of being in the moment, of seeing the world through fresh eyes. Paris was everything they had imagined and more. The city felt alive with history, art, and culture. They wandered through cobbled streets, savoring pastries in small cafes, getting lost in the maze of the Latin Quarter, and standing in awe in front of the Louvre, not as tourists ticking off a list of sights to see, but as two people genuinely immersed in the magic of a place that had shaped so much of the world's artistic heritage. It was in Paris, on a warm evening in Montmartre, that James realized something profound. He had always associated adventure with travel, going to new places, experiencing new things, but he was beginning to understand that the true adventure wasn't in the destinations themselves. It was in the moments they shared together, the way Lucy would laugh at his silly jokes, or the way they would share a quiet sunset by the Seine, not saying anything at all, but feeling connected in a way that was beyond words. The adventure was in the bond they were strengthening, in the way their love was growing deeper, richer, with each new experience. After Paris, their travels took them to the rolling hills of Tuscany, where they spent a few weeks in a charming farmhouse overlooking vineyards that stretched out as far as the eye could see. It was a peaceful time, one that allowed them to breathe deeply and savor the simplicity of life. They took cooking classes, learning to prepare pasta from scratch, and spent hours in the countryside, hiking through olive groves and enjoying the kind of tranquility they hadn't known they were missing. Then they headed to Asia, starting with Japan. The bustling streets of Tokyo were a sharp contrast to the serenity of Tuscany, but it was precisely this variety that made their journey so rich. They marveled at the neon lights, the energy of the city, and the deep reverence for tradition that coexisted with the rapid pace of modern life. They visited temples, walked through tranquil gardens, and experienced the calming ritual of a traditional tea ceremony, finding moments of reflection even amidst the chaos of the city. As their year of travel continued, James and Lucy found themselves drawn to the unexpected. They didn't just seek the popular tourist attractions. They sought out the quieter, more intimate experiences, the hidden cafes tucked away in alleys, the spontaneous conversations with locals, and the moments of stillness they found in nature. There was an evening in New Zealand, as they hiked through the southern Alps, when they found themselves standing on a mountaintop, gazing out over a landscape so vast and beautiful that it took their breath away. The sky was painted in shades of pink and purple, and the wind was sharp and cold, but the air felt crisp and alive, full of possibility. As they stood there, their hands clasped tightly together, Lucy turned to James and said softly, "We've made a lifetime of memories in just 1 year." James looked at her, his heart full. "And we'll make a lifetime of memories in the years to come. This is just the beginning." They stayed in New Zealand for a few months, immersing themselves in the wild landscapes, the rich culture, and the warmth of the people they met. It was a place that reminded them that there was beauty in both the chaos and the stillness of life, that sometimes the most profound moments were found not in the places they visited, but in the connections they made and the way they chose to be present in each moment. As they boarded the plane for their return journey, James and Lucy felt a quiet but profound sense of fulfillment. The year they had spent together, traveling the world, experiencing life in its most unfiltered form, had irrevocably changed them. The memories they had created were etched into their hearts, but what was even more important was the realization that their adventure wasn't defined by the places they visited or the sights they saw. It was defined by how they had grown together as individuals and as partners. The flight home was peaceful. James watched Lucy as she gazed out of the window, her eyes lost in thought, her face soft with contentment. She had become, in every sense of the word, his home. Wherever they went, whatever they did, the heart of their journey had always been the love they shared. When they finally touched down, returning to the city that had once felt so small and ordinary compared to the vast expanses they had explored, there was no sense of regret or hesitation. They had completed their year of adventure, but that didn't mean their lives would return to what they had been before. In fact, they realized that their time away had equipped them with new perspectives, new priorities. They no longer viewed their home as just a place to live. It was now a sanctuary, a base from which to continue building the life they had started. They rented a small apartment in the city near a park they had visited on occasion during their time off, and in the quiet moments of that first week back, they talked about their future, not as a distant, nebulous thing, but as something they could shape with intention and purpose. They both agreed on one thing: they would never stop adventuring. The world had become too rich and vast to just stand still, and they knew their hearts would always long for new experiences. But this time, they didn't need to travel the globe to feel alive. Their adventures would be woven into the fabric of their everyday lives. It was the mundane moments, the shared cup of coffee in the morning, the spontaneous road trips, the quiet walks under the moonlight, that would become their new landscapes to explore. The months after their return were filled with small, significant changes. They each pursued passions that had been put on hold during their earlier years of focusing on careers and obligations. Lucy began writing, chronicling their travels, and reflecting on their personal growth. James started volunteering at a local community center, channeling his energy into helping others who needed guidance and support. Their individual pursuits didn't pull them apart, but brought them closer as they shared their joys, challenges, and discoveries. They also found ways to create new traditions. Every year, on the anniversary of their departure for their year of travel, they would take a long weekend getaway, somewhere new, somewhere unexpected. It became a way to keep the spirit of their adventure alive, to remind themselves of the importance of exploring not just the world, but the depths of their relationship. One quiet evening, several years later, they sat on their balcony overlooking the city skyline. It had become their place to unwind, to talk about everything and nothing at the same time. Lucy rested her head on James's shoulder, and they watched the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. "You know," Lucy said softly, "I think what I love most about our story is that it's never been about having everything figured out. It's about the willingness to embrace the unknown and to trust each other through it all." James smiled, his arm wrapping around her. "I couldn't agree more. I think that's what makes it all so beautiful. The uncertainty, the mystery. We don't know what comes next, but as long as we're together, I'm ready for anything." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, letting the quiet of the evening settle around them. The world had changed, and so had they, but the bond they shared was something timeless, something that no amount of travel or experience could diminish. Their journey, both the literal and the metaphorical, was far from over. They knew that there would be new adventures, new challenges, and even moments of uncertainty ahead. But they also knew that together they could face whatever life threw at them. They had learned that life's greatest adventure was never about the destination. It was about the love, the partnership, and the willingness to walk through the unknown hand in hand. And so, as the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, they knew that, no matter where they went, no matter what came, their way, their greatest journey had always been, and always would be, the one they took together. As the years flowed by, the world outside continued to evolve, and so did James and Lucy, but their bond remained steadfast, a quiet testament to the strength of their love. The adventure they had begun together, fueled by trust, curiosity, and a shared vision of the future, had become something they carried with them wherever they went. But life, as always, had more in store for them. It was during a particularly rainy spring that Lucy came to James with a thought that had been germinating in her mind for months. They had become so comfortable in their lives, so settled into the rhythms of their routines, that the idea of another big change, another grand adventure, had begun to stir in her heart. "I've been thinking," Lucy said one evening after they had shared a quiet dinner and cleaned up the dishes. She sat down beside him on the couch, her eyes glowing with that familiar spark of curiosity. "What if we expand the adventure? What if we start a family?" James looked at her in surprise. They had always talked about children, had even jokingly planned out what they would name them during their quiet nights in Tuscany, but it had never been the right time. They had both been focused on their careers, their passions, and the unpredictability of their travels. Now, Lucy's words echoed in the stillness of the room, bringing with them a new sense of gravity. "Are you serious?" James asked gently, sensing the weight of her question. He had always imagined they would follow their own path, free from the constraints of traditional milestones, but as Lucy's question sank in, he found that he wasn't as uncertain as he had expected. The idea of bringing a child into their life, sharing the adventure of parenthood, felt like another layer of the journey, one they could navigate together. Lucy nodded, her eyes softening as she watched him. "I think we're ready. We've built something beautiful together, and I want to share that love with someone else. I want to see the world through their eyes, experience all the new firsts. Again, the first steps, the first words, the first everything." James considered this for a long time. He had never been one to rush into anything, but Lucy was right. They had built a life that was rich in love and experiences, and the thought of expanding it, sharing it with a child, was a new adventure he hadn't fully realized he was ready for. "You know," he said slowly, "when we first met, I couldn't imagine how we'd fit into each other's worlds. But look at us now. We've built something incredible together, and the more I think about it, the more I realize we can do this too. We'll figure it out. We always do." A smile spread across Lucy's face as relief washed over her. "So we're in this together?" "We always have been," James said, his voice full of certainty. "And we always will be." And so, with that quiet commitment, they began to make plans for the next chapter of their journey, one that would involve sleepless nights, messy kitchens, and an entirely new world of discovery. The idea of parenthood wasn't just a logical progression in their lives. It was another step in the grand adventure of love, one that they would embark on together with the same openness and trust they had carried with them through every phase of their relationship. The months that followed were filled with anticipation, joy, and a bit of chaos as they prepared for the arrival of their child. They moved to a larger home, one with a garden where they could watch their child play under the same sky that had watched over them in their travels. It was a new kind of adventure, one that would test their patience and resilience in ways they hadn't anticipated. But it was also a continuation of everything they had already built. A partnership based on love, openness, and a shared desire to live fully, no matter the circumstances. When their son was born, it was as though the world itself shifted once again. James had always believed in the importance of adventure, of experiencing life to its fullest. But the love he felt for his son, in that moment when he first held him in his arms, surpassed anything he had ever imagined. It wasn't just a new chapter. It was an entirely new book, filled with stories he couldn't wait to write. The days became filled with laughter and wonder. The first time their son laughed, the first time he said "Mama" and "Dada," the first time he took his first steps, all of these moments were etched into their hearts, treasures they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. And even in the sleepless nights and the challenges that came with parenthood, James and Lucy found themselves growing in ways they had never expected. Their love, their commitment to each other and to their child, deepened with every passing day. But the spirit of adventure they had cultivated through their travels, their love, and their shared journey did not fade. It simply evolved. As the years rolled on, the family, James, Lucy, and their now growing child, continued to live their lives with the same open-hearted spirit of adventure they had always embraced. Their son, a curious and lively boy, began to take on the same infectious enthusiasm for life that his parents had nurtured in each other. His eyes would light up whenever they talked about the places they'd been, the sights they'd seen, and the stories they'd gathered from all around the world. To him, the world was a treasure trove of mystery, and he seemed to want to explore it all, just like his parents had before him. James and Lucy had, in their own way, shared the most important lesson of their travels with him. Life itself is the greatest adventure. Every step they took together, every new discovery they made, became an opportunity for growth, joy, and connection. But their travels were no longer just about them. Now they were about creating a shared family history, weaving stories that would last far beyond their lifetimes. They returned to the places they had once visited alone: Paris, New Zealand, Japan, revisiting the cities and landscapes that had shaped their journey as a couple. But this time, it was different. They saw everything through the eyes of their child, who was fascinated by every new sight, every new sound, every cultural difference. What had once been an intimate journey between two people had now become a family odyssey, and it was one that brought a new depth of meaning to each of the experiences they shared. There was a particularly memorable moment during a trip to the Greek islands. Their son, no older than 5 at the time, ran ahead, excited by the sight of the turquoise waters and the ancient ruins scattered along the hillsides. Lucy and James, walking slowly behind, held hands, watching their son's joy, feeling the warmth of the sun on their skin and the salty breeze in their hair. James squeezed Lucy's hand and said, "Remember when we used to dream about this life? About seeing the world together?" Lucy smiled softly, her heart full. "I remember. It feels like we've been on this journey forever. And yet, it's always new. Every time we come to a new place, it's like we're discovering it for the first time. But it's so much richer now because we're sharing it." And that, James realized, was what made all of their travels, every adventure, every change, every experience, so profoundly meaningful. It wasn't just about the places, the landmarks, or the world-changing events they had witnessed. It was about the relationships they had built along the way, the love that had grown between them, and now the new love that was expanding in the form of their son. The journey wasn't just about seeing the world. It was about discovering more of each other and the deeper bonds that life could offer. As their son grew older, the adventures continued to evolve. They traveled less for the sake of exploration, and more for the sake of creating memories that would become a part of their family's shared history. They took road trips across the country, explored hidden gems in their own hometown, and sought out new experiences closer to home, taking their son to museums, parks, and libraries, encouraging him to find his own passions and curiosities. But there were also times when they ventured farther from home, perhaps to a remote village in the Italian Alps, where they learned the art of cheese-making from a local family, or to an ancient forest in Costa Rica, where they hiked through the lush greenery, marveling at the wildlife. These trips were no longer about ticking off a list of places to see. They were about teaching their son to embrace the world's wonders and to understand that adventure could be found anywhere, even in the most unexpected places. Eventually, as their son reached his teenage years, the family dynamic shifted again. He began to develop his own interests, his own sense of independence, and soon he was traveling with his own friends, seeking out new experiences and carving his own path. But even as he began to venture out on his own, the foundation that James and Lucy had built, rooted in love, curiosity, and a sense of wonder, remained the constant thread that tied them all together. And so, the adventure continued, albeit in a new form. James and Lucy found themselves navigating the challenges and joys of parenting teenagers, but they never lost sight of the simple truth they had learned all those years ago. The journey of life is never truly about the destination. It's about the people you share it with, the way you grow, learn, and adapt together, and the memories you create along the way. There were moments when life would throw its challenges, financial difficulties, the pressures of work, and the growing pains of their son becoming an adult. But each time, they returned to the one lesson that had sustained them all this time. Together, they could face anything. As the years passed, and their son began to carve out his own future, James and Lucy entered yet another chapter of their lives, one filled with a new kind of freedom, but also with the deep awareness of the passage of time. Their love had not only endured the ups and downs of life, but had also matured into something even more profound and steady. They had reached a place where both their individual pursuits and their shared experiences formed a harmonious rhythm, a comfortable dance that had become second nature. But as much as they had enjoyed the quiet peace of their lives, there was always an undercurrent of something more, a quiet hunger for further discovery. They had seen so much of the world already, yet they couldn't shake the feeling that there were still uncharted territories within their hearts and minds. With their son now off pursuing his own dreams, James and Lucy had the time and the freedom to explore these new frontiers together. One day, as they sat together in their cozy home, a thought struck James like a bolt of lightning. It was a simple idea, but one that would shift their lives once again, this time in a way they hadn't anticipated. "Lucy," he said, his voice almost tentative, "have you ever thought about writing a book? Something that could be a testament to everything we've experienced? Something we can pass down to our son, to our grandchildren, even to the people who've been a part of our journey?" Lucy looked at him, a soft smile curving her lips. She had always been a writer in her heart, capturing their travels and experiences in journals, short stories, and articles. But the idea of something larger, a book, was something that had never quite crossed her mind in such a concrete way. She considered it for a moment, her mind turning over the possibilities. "I suppose I've always wanted to," she said slowly, her voice carrying a tinge of excitement. "But it's always felt too big, too daunting. I didn't know where to start." James reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "You don't have to do it alone. We've always done everything together, and this could be no different. I'll help you, every step of the way. Let's tell our story, the real one, the one that's ours, the ups, the downs, the love, the loss, the triumphs, the failures, the adventure of it all." Lucy's heart swelled as she looked at him, seeing the familiar spark of adventure in his eyes, the same spark that had first ignited their love. The idea of writing a book together, capturing their journey in words, felt like the perfect next step. And so, they began the process, not as writers, sitting in front of a typewriter or computer screen, but as two people who had lived an extraordinary life. Their shared history, The adventures, the triumphs, the quiet moments, the struggles, wove together into the tapestry of their story. They took turns writing, but always read each other's words, offering feedback, encouragement, and laughter. The book, which they decided to title The Greatest Adventure, was an exploration of their love story, of their travels, of the lessons they had learned, and of the way their relationship had deepened and evolved over the years. But it was more than just a memoir. It was a celebration of everything they had created together. The moments of joy, the heartache, the moments of doubt, and the moments of pure, unfiltered love. It was a record of their personal evolution, a testament to the strength of partnership, and a tribute to the way life had unfolded in unexpected yet beautiful ways. As they poured their hearts into the book, they began to see their life with fresh eyes. It was as though, by writing it all down, they were rediscovering the magic that had always been present, but perhaps had been overlooked in the everyday rhythms of life. They laughed together as they relived the moments they had almost forgotten, like the time they had gotten lost on a small island in the Mediterranean and ended up discovering a hidden village, or the time they had faced a near crisis on a mountaintop in Patagonia, only to come out of it stronger than ever. These were the moments that defined them, moments that had shaped the very essence of their journey. The process wasn't without its challenges. There were moments of frustration when the words didn't flow as easily as they hoped. There were times when their differences in perspective led to disagreements, when Lucy's poetic style clashed with James's more straightforward approach. But through it all, they were reminded of the core of their relationship, the ability to navigate challenges with patience, understanding, and most importantly, love. The day they finished the manuscript was one of quiet celebration. It wasn't the end of their journey, but a new beginning. They had created something that would live on, long after they were gone, a legacy of the life they had shared and the adventure they had embraced. As the years went on, James and Lucy continued to age gracefully, their love and companionship as unwavering as ever. Their story had become not just a testament to their own journey, but a beacon for those who encountered it, a living, breathing illustration of what it meant to live a full life. Their son, now an accomplished young man with his own family, frequently called to check in, often telling them how the wisdom they'd imparted shaped his own views on life, relationships, and the future. But as much as they loved seeing their son grow, it was in the quiet moments that their hearts truly found peace. A shared cup of tea on the porch as the sun dipped low on the horizon. A slow walk through the neighborhood park, hand in hand, watching the seasons shift. In these moments, they had no need for words. The years of adventure, struggle, joy, and love were etched into their hearts and minds, silently speaking louder than any spoken promise or declaration. One spring evening, as they sat on the porch swing, the air thick with the scent of blooming jasmine, James turned to Lucy, his gaze softer than it had ever been before. "Do you ever wonder," he began slowly, "what our lives would have looked like if we hadn't taken that leap all those years ago? If we'd never left home? If we hadn't embraced the unknown?" Lucy smiled gently, her hand resting in his, as she gazed out at the world around them. "I think about it sometimes, but the truth is I wouldn't change a thing, not one moment of it. It was the risk, the willingness to take the leap, that shaped us into who we are, that made us who we were always meant to be." James nodded thoughtfully. "I'm glad we took that leap, but I'm even gladder for the fact that we kept leaping, even when it didn't seem easy. Every step, every turn was a choice we made together, and that's what makes it all so meaningful." It was then that they realized life had never been about the grand, world-shaking decisions, the landmark experiences, or the dizzying highs of foreign lands. It had always been about the choices they made together, the commitment they shared, and the steady companionship that had been their anchor through it all. The grand adventure had been the partnership itself. And now, as they entered their twilight years, they had no regrets. In fact, they had a sense of completeness, as if the chapters of their story had come to a natural, satisfying conclusion. But even in this late stage, they weren't ready to say goodbye to adventure entirely. One day, their son and his family came to visit, as they often did, bringing with them a new sense of joy. Their grandchildren, now at the age where they were beginning to see the world with wide-eyed wonder, were the latest generation to experience the legacy James and Lucy had built. With laughter, stories, and the simple delight of being together, the family felt a profound connection across generations. It was as if time itself had slowed, and the bond between them all, parents, children, and grandchildren, had become an unbreakable thread that wove the past, present, and future into one. That evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, James felt a sense of peace, unlike anything he had known before. The room was filled with voices, all telling stories, laughing, and sharing in the warmth of family. He looked over at Lucy, who had her arm around their granddaughter, a proud smile on her face. The light from the candles flickered in the dimming twilight, casting shadows across the room, and James knew that he had lived the most beautiful adventure of all. In the quiet of the night, as the house finally fell still and they lay together in bed, James whispered to Lucy, his voice soft with contentment, "I think we've created something extraordinary." Lucy turned toward him, her eyes glimmering, with the same love they'd shared since their early days together. "We didn't just create something extraordinary, James. We became something extraordinary. And now, we get to watch it continue." Their adventure, though no longer centered on faraway lands or the thrill of discovery, had evolved into something even richer, a legacy of love, resilience, and connection. They had planted seeds in the hearts of their son and his family, nurturing those seeds with care and devotion, watching them bloom into the next generation of explorers, dreamers, and storytellers. And so, as the days slowly turned into years, James and Lucy continued to walk through life with the same sense of adventure they had always carried. Their travels, though not as frequent, remained ever present in their hearts, memories that would never fade, even as their bodies grew older. For in the quiet of their home, amidst the sounds of family and the passage of time, they found that the most important journey of all was the one that connected them, generation after generation, to the heart of life itself.